Good morning.
What a gift to be here in community. So I will lead us in prayer, and after the prayer, there will be 2 minutes of meditation, introspection, and Brent will bring us back with his music. So I invite you to step into prayer with me. Sweet, sweet Spirit, infinite presence is all there is. I recognize this divine mind expressing as each of us. And in this spirit of recognition, I know I am one with Spirit. And so beautiful to wake up to a brand new day and hear the birds singing, celebrating life, just as we are here celebrating each other in person, virtually, everywhere. We celebrate, and we know that each moment is a new dawn. Each moment brings new gifts. And I see the gifts of creativity, inspiration, love and joy, and so much more. Knowing that every moment is a new beginning, each of us regenerates and reflects on being present, on being here. This infinite presence is complete and perfect, an illumination surrounding each of us and showering us with these gifts. And so I know that this spiritual community is just so beautiful, so sacred and blessed that each of us is a gift to each other. And as we breathe that in, feel that connection. Feel that divine love that is in every aspect of each of our bodies and in our souls. So that we can willingly release any past limitations and move forward into greater and greater spiritual consciousness. I gratefully accept all of these gifts, knowing that the words are inspiration. The music is creativity in motion. And our being together here in this spiritual space, this sacred space, we are love and joy come to life. And celebrating each moment, in the deepest gratitude, I release this into the law, knowing this is our truth, knowing this is who we are. And I am so gifted with this connection. And together we can say, and so it is. And now let's reflect on that love for a couple of minutes.
Last month's theme, if I recall, was shining light in the darkness. I'm going to start off today with a little bit of that. And this is going to be perhaps a bit of a difficult part of the talk. We will not stay here, but I want to shine some light into some darkness, if that's all right. Tomorrow is Juneteenth, which many of you may know is a combination of June 19th, which was the celebration or the honoring of the freeing of the last enslaved people in the United States. And there have been enslaved African people in present-day United States since 1526, when they were first brought here by the Spaniards. They helped build Florida and some of the surrounding areas. In August of 1619, what's described as 20-odd slaves arrived in the colony of Virginia, beginning the use of, by British people, of enslaved African people in the American colonies. And it should be noted that Native Americans and Native peoples throughout the Americas had been enslaved by others for a long period of time, years before that. And even among white people, there was what's known as indentured servitude, which is basically a form of slavery that was brought over from England. And so while slavery is often blamed on whites alone, it's important to note that Africans were captured by other African tribes, rival tribes oftentimes, and then forced marched from their inland homes to the ports on the coast to be sold. Breathe. I invite you to breathe and keep your heart open for this. Initially, they were sold to Portuguese and Dutch traders, and then later to British, French, and Spanish traders. And it's estimated that in the 3 centuries of the slave trade, 4 million Africans died before they ever landed in the Americas. Half of them died on forced marches in Africa. Half of them died in the transport ships, including by suicide, choosing to get out rather than to be forced into what they were being forced into. Enslaved people were considered less than human. They were just cargo, they were just goods to be traded. And although the ship's captains did very well, the sailors on these ships, who oftentimes didn't believe in the slave trade and didn't want to be there, were mistreated, cheated out of their already low wages, forced into sailing or be jailed. And about 20% of the sailors actually died on the voyages. Because the cargo hold was full, they had to do all their sleeping and everything up on deck in the 6 weeks to 3 months that it took to make the journey. Breathe. The slave trade was finally abolished due to combined efforts in both Europe and America in the mid-1800s. And the American Civil War was part of the process of ending slavery. The Emancipation Proclamation was issued on January 1st, 1863, but Confederate states resisted it until the war ended. Texas was the last holdout. Why am I not surprised? Texas was the last holdout until June 19th, 1865. Sorry, I know Brent's from Texas, and there's light in Texas too. And on June 19th, 1865, Major General Gordon Granger proclaimed freedom for the slaves of Texas. And so tomorrow is a day to both celebrate the freedom of enslaved people and to grieve the fact that we enslaved people at all, the practice and consciousness that made such a day necessary. And to recommit to the freedom of all people, while recognizing that even today, slavery continues in other forms, in other places, including right here in the United States, as people use illegal immigrants for forced labor with the threat of deporting them, reporting them to officials, and getting them deported back to the countries they try to get away from. They're used in Asian sweatshops where a lot of us buy our clothes and goods. Slavery is still happening in the world. So let us reaffirm and continue to move forward for the true freedom of all people. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "No one is free until all are free." Ernest Holmes says, "The only agenda of the universe is freedom." And so let's have a moment of prayerful silence as we remember, as we honor the souls who made that journey, the souls who didn't survive that journey, all the pain, all the suffering, and yet all the freeing from that pain that is happening and still is in progress, because that process is a long, long wake. We're still in it. So take a moment of silence to surround all of that with light and with love. And to commit to being a place that stands for freedom of all people. We get reminded that oftentimes we have no idea how, but Spirit does. And so we tap into that Spirit, not as a way of just saying, oh yeah, that big thing over there, that can handle it, but saying, how can I express truth and freedom and light? Let's take one more breath. So how do we go from talking about slavery to talking about today's topic of pleasure? Wow. This month we're looking at embracing self-care. We're looking at this year of living out loud. Living, not being enslaved, living out loud. So let's take a look at underlying beliefs and behaviors which affect both. At the core of all of this is a belief in separation. A belief that we are separate from the divine, and from this a belief that we are separate from each other, the planet, and life itself. And from this belief, we both devalue our own humanity as well as the humanity of others. And we can dehumanize and devalue others, which allows us to do stuff like using people. We view both ourselves and others as being less than divine and buying into the shadow side of tribalism, which namely, my tribe is better than your tribe. And whether that tribe is some ancient tribe or it's a contemporary tribe known as a nation or politics, political parties, religions, businesses, species, and how we use the planet itself, placing my or our tribe's needs above all else, our belief in separation leads us to then fear the other. If they're not part of my tribe, I'm afraid of them. And that combination then leads us to wanting to control life, others, and our own selves. We are slaves to that consciousness, to that belief system. We want to control particularly the aspects of ourselves that we judge as weak or bad, what Jung calls our shadow side. And then out of this form religions with rules and beliefs about what pleases and displeases their idea of a God. Anybody relate? Such as the current views on homosexuality, which we might want to remember as we're in the midst of Pride Month. If we live in a belief that we are engaged in a holy war with an evil force, whatever name we want to give to that evil force, then we must constantly be on guard and engaged, not letting our guard down for a single moment. You know, last week we did the song, the Talking Heads song, Heaven, describing heaven as a place where nothing ever happens. Today we might have done the talk, Life in Wartime, which has a chorus that goes, this ain't no party, this ain't no disco, this ain't no fooling around. No time for dancing or lovey-dovey. I ain't got time for that now. I don't have time for self-care if I'm in the middle of a war. I don't have time for caring about you if I'm in the middle of a war, a holy war, a business war, a national war, my tribe's war against something else. Once you have that mindset, things like self-care and pleasure are evils which pull you away from your true purpose. Breathe. This shows up in our business life. Work, 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 work. This is the shadow side of the masculine, by the way. Work, 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 work. Don't take a break. Breaks are for weaklings. Self-care is not important. In religion, our true purpose is fighting Satan to get to heaven, or freedom from the birth-death cycle in Eastern religion so that we can get out of this life cycle with a view that the world is separate from the divine. That's the core view. When we do that, then the world, the human, is viewed as evil, something to be overcome, something to be gotten out of, something to get away from, as are our desires, until we believe that any desire we have, anything we want, anything that makes us feel truly happy is wrong. Because you're not supposed to be happy in this lifetime, right? You're supposed to put that off until when? Heaven. The place where nothing ever happens. We see this in the Puritan ethic that underlies a lot of American values, as well as in the East, believing that we should sit in a monastery chanting or suffer in poverty, all to clear our karmic debt. Or that Earth is a classroom with a big teacher in the sky in which we must learn our lessons. Breathe. There's a lot of breathing here. All of this is to become free from our humanity because we consider it less than divine. And so because of this disrespect for humanity, we can enslave others, we can enslave ourselves to lives of struggle and survival. So let's talk about the radical, rebellious notion of pleasure. Okay? Pleasure can be defined as a feeling of happy satisfaction and enjoyment. Breathe that in, a feeling of happy satisfaction and enjoyment. We must be careful how we approach pleasure, because so much of the modern concept of pleasure, what's called pleasure, is really self-indulgence. It's a substitution. It's a cheap fast food, if you will, that's not very satisfying. It satisfies for a moment, but it doesn't give a real deep satisfaction. And because we feel separate from our divine self, because we don't listen to that part of us that knows deep satisfaction, that already lives in deep satisfaction, we indulge whims of the moment instead of the deeper sense of satisfaction and joy. You know, I love Ernest Holmes' idea that our good, whatever good we want, there's two things we ask about it. Does it bring more life, more joy, and more happiness? And does it harm no one, including myself? That second one is very important, yes? And the first one is important. Is it life-affirming? Does it bring more life? So we don't run off on things that are harmful to us. So let's talk about the erotic. The erotic. That is what I said. Erotic. Notice how uncomfortable that is to even use the word in a church. Because we have a conditioning. Audre Lorde, who is a black lesbian woman, presented a 1978 paper to a women's conference in which she said, the erotic is a resource within each of us that lies in a deeply female and spiritual plane. By female and spiritual plane, it hides from plain view. In order to perpetuate itself, every system of oppression must corrupt or distort those various sources of power within the culture of the oppressed that can provide energy for change. And this has meant a suppression of the erotic as a considered source of power and information within our lives. That's a different view of the erotic. She's clearly saying that the erotic is not the confused, trivial, neurotic, psychotic, or plasticized sensation. It's not limited to just sex. Rather, it's the power of living in full expression and aliveness in any aspect of our lives. It's an internal sense of deep satisfaction. And it's not what we are doing, but how acutely we feel the doingness. How acutely and fully we feel the doing. And since we have felt this, and once we have felt this, once we've stepped out into that, the mind that's stretched can never go back, right? Once we finally feel of what it's like to live fully, to experience and express fully, we honor and respect ourselves, our capital S selves, by requiring no less than that being present in our lives. We won't settle for anything less once we are there. That's why this concept is so dangerous to people who want to keep us suppressed. This concept of the erotic is similar to what Ernest Holmes calls the divine urge, which he defines as the inner desire to express life. The desire to do and accomplish more, to be more completely happy, prosperous, and well. It is part of that eternally progressive spirit of unfoldment. We live in a universe that is more constantly expressing itself in more and more wonderful ways. Do we want to stay open to that? Do we want to stay closed to that? As an aside, I recently had the aha that several diseases, I don't know, maybe all diseases, but I'm going to just put several, a couple that I'm working with, known as diabetes and high blood pressure, are diseases of resistance to the flow of life. Can we open to life flowing more fully, is the question we get to ask ourselves. One way the erotic functions is providing the power which comes from deeply sharing any pursuit with another person. It's one of the reasons we come together, to share deeply, opening in joy with each other, to witness and be witnessed fully and lovingly. A number of you got together yesterday, the women in the community got together yesterday for the women's retreat. And that's a process of being present, fully present with each other, witnessing and being witnessed, loving and being loved. The erotic connection with our self, capital S self, also opens us to our capacity for joy in everything, on every level. And it opens us up whether we're painting a fence, building a bookshelf, writing a poetry, dancing, singing, making love, whatever it is. It opens us up to our capacity, our fuller capacity for joy, which is greater than any of us really know. Yeah? Yes. If you don't know that, the answer is yes. Our capacity for joy is infinite because we are the infinite in form. As we recognize our deepest feelings, as we awaken and grow our capacity for joy, it's like a muscle, we stretch it, we exercise it, we begin to give up being satisfied with suffering and self-negation. We begin to give up being satisfied with numbness and hopelessness. For our capacity for joy is our connection with the divine. I've talked on several occasions about Thomas Troward's idea of the 7 main aspects of God, and the final one, and it's a progression from life all the way to joy. The purpose of life is joy. Breathe that in. So we open up to this joy that is our connection with the divine and with our sacred human self. Because we are divine. We are both the divine and human. We are the divine being human. And this form is just as divine as anything else you can think of. We release feeling powerless. We release feeling resigned, despairing. We stop putting ourselves down. We stop denying ourselves or settling into depression. And the light of deep joy, deep pleasure, outshines any darkness. Audre Lorde in that same paper also said, recognizing the power of the erotic within our lives can give us the energy to pursue genuine change in our world, rather than merely settling for a shift of characters in the same weary drama. Isn't that a great line? I'm going to say that's not just external out here, but that's internal. We have our own same characters that we're weary of, that keep running us, And we can each shift them around, or we can allow that light, that brilliant light of joy, of love, of the erotic nature, as she calls it. It's interesting to note that the word erotic comes from the Greek god Eros, whose name means love and desire, and who was married to, anybody know? Psyche, which is the soul. So this eros, this love, this desire combined with the soul is our energy. And although fearful society has limited the idea of the erotic to just sex, it's far more and far deeper. Our erotic nature is our nature, and through us, Spirit's nature of aliveness. Our erotic nature is our aliveness, fully expressing in a world that needs that self-expression to free itself of slavery. This week, I'm going to invite you to do one spiritual practice, and that is contemplate how you can more fully express your eros, your love affair with your soul. Will you take that on? I'm going to close with a reading of an erotic experience with the divine. It's by a gentleman named James Finley, who at the time, or at one point in his life, was a monk living in a monastery. And he says, "One day as I walked back and forth in the loft of the barn reading the Psalms, I began to realize that what we tend to think of as the air is actually God. I began to realize that in a subtle interior way, I sensed that I was walking back and forth in the atmospheric, all-encompassing presence of God, who was sustaining me breath by breath. The most intimate depth of this awakening moment was the simple awareness that God, who was sustaining my life breath by breath, knew me through and through as mercy within mercy within mercy. We might say as love within love within love. I was so overtaken by the intimate depths of my very presence being accessed by the presence of God in this way that I stopped reading the Psalms and simply sat on a bale of straw, breathing God as I looked out over the meadow. What was even more amazing is that this grace awareness of God and I, inhaling and exhaling ourselves into each other, continued for the next 3 days. It's not that I walked around in some kind of trance, quite the opposite actually, in that I felt very present to each thing that I did throughout the day, but present in a pervasive, underlying awareness of being in the presence of God, sustaining me breath by breath, knowing me through and through with an infused sense of mercy without end, love without end. The third day of my God-breathing way of life fell on a Sunday. As I walked along a narrow dirt path with its overarching canopy of trees, I paused and touched a leaf hanging from a low-lying branch. As I touched the leaf, I looked up and saw a single cloud hanging in the clear blue sky and whispered, "It's one. It's all one." The infinite presence of God I was breathing, the cloud in the sky, the leaf I was touching, the earth on which I was standing, and the immediacy of feeling myself blessed and awakened to this all-encompassing presence were, in that instant, realized to be inexplicably and all-pervasively one. Please know that the words I'm using in attempting to describe this intimately realized oneness are impoverished in a superficial, wordy kind of way compared to the tremendous oneness beyond words that I was so graced and privileged to experience. Moved by the all-encompassing presence in which I was immersed, I walked off the path onto a field where I sat in the tall grass, moved by a strong wind, with the blue sky overhead, all of which were experienced as bodying forth the endless diversity of the oneness of presence that alone is ultimately real. I call that having sex with God. It is this intimate oneness. It is this intimate interaction. It is available not just to him because he was a monk in a monastery. It is available to us moment by moment, day by day. And so that's the invitation that I give you this week, is to tune into that frequency that is available to each of us. We have an affirmation. And say this with me, please. I express my full aliveness, my divinely erotic nature in my life. I love myself. One more time. I express my full aliveness, my divinely erotic nature in my life. I love myself. And so it is. Thank you. Look around at the faces of divinity. Remember that your face is one of those faces. That our humanity and our divinity are one and the same, just different aspects, different expressions of the same thing. Find that in your heart, find that in your being. And so I simply know that because there is only one life, one infinite presence, that each of us is one of that right here, right now. We are one of the love and the wholeness and the joy and the power and the peace, the wisdom, the beauty. We are that. And we are free. And we know in that freedom that all people are free. And we are the space that allows that to show up on this planet. Just as we are the space that allows the fullness of the expression of life, which is freedom, to show up on this planet. And gratitude for being willing to be participants in this life, in the highest and best of this life. I simply release this word into a law that moves into form, expression, and experience in our lives and in the collective world life. Knowing it is already so in the mind of God, it is now established as so in our minds. As Ernest Holmes says, 1 plus truth, 1 plus God is a majority. And so it is.